All right, I call this meeting to order of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors for a Committee of the Whole meeting. And we only have one topic to discuss tonight, and that is school closing options / Vision 2020. And tonight what we were hoping to do, and I should say, Director Gosa is participating by phone, I believe, right? Director Gosa?
Yes.
Okay. And Director DeSalvo is away, but she left me with some written remarks, which I will go ahead and read at some time when it's appropriate. So we'll go ahead and get started. There were two items that board members were asked to think about in preparation for this meeting. One is to review the 6 factors required by board policy when considering closing a school, indicate in general which of the factors are most important in his or her deliberations, and number 2, taking each option one at a time, board members list the facts or information which support the premise that this should not be the choice. So over the next few months, the intent is to try to get to a decision and help the administration and especially the superintendent make a recommendation that the board can support. So we can get right into the statement of options everybody's already aware of, I believe, and the evaluation of factors is something that a lot of people may not be aware of. So I'm going to open it up to talk about specific factors in a moment, unless does any board member have anything that they want to say before we start? Okay, let's just start. We'll go down through and in general, this is something that the superintendent would like to hear, we would all like to hear. What's important to you as an individual when you're considering these options? And I don't mean the options of specific schools. I'm talking about the factors that you're going to be considering. The quality of education, safety of students and security, the cost of necessary capital improvements, effect on the community, miscellaneous factors, and then of course there's savings. Does anybody want to talk about that? What is important to you as an individual? Excuse me? Okay. Director Hayes.
Actually, all of it was very important to me. Now, one thing, of course, miscellaneous was extremely broad, but as far as the other 5, I guess if I had to rank them, I would rank safety of students being first and foremost. My quality of education was second. Costs and necessary improvements, that ranked up there third. And for the cost of operation, that was pretty important, but in listening to, I know the decisions that we have to make are extremely tough, but in listening to some of the speakers at the forum, I got the feeling almost as though even though we have to cut all these costs, that it wasn't an important element to the community as it is to us. So I guess I will rank that lower, although I know the importance of cutting all these millions here, but I guess the quality of education and the safety were first and foremost my most important ones.
All right, anybody else? Director Potts.
And needless to say, everybody thinks they're all important, but I think you've got to, in your thinking, you wind up
weighing one more than the other. And the three that I think weigh the most in my thought process is the impact on curriculum and delivery. Because two of the proposals we have here would require a change of attendance center for, 1,100 sixth graders, which means that curriculum is going to change. What the delivery of their curriculum in the sixth grade at the intermediates is going to be different than the curriculum that's going to be delivered to them as sixth graders in the elementary schools. And part of curriculum delivery is staff, teachers, and two of the proposals will create a lot of teacher movement from the intermediate to the elementary schools. Whole process is going to have to be developed to facilitate that. We don't have the bidding any longer. And so that all, to me, that all wraps into this idea of the importance of curriculum delivery. And that may be that might weight more in my three than the other two. The other is general student welfare, and to me that encompasses the movement, changing buildings, changing schools. It involves the environment that they'll be in, the leaving one. Some of these students are going to leave one community that they're in a school and have to go to another school. Some school communities are going to be fractured and sent to different buildings depending on options selected. My third one is the effect on the neighborhood concept of closing a school, because that has significant impact in that immediate community. And in some instances, we're talking about a relatively small impact footprint of a school to talking about a school that is the only school in an entire city. And so I think that has to factor in. What the proportions are, that's, I suppose for me it would depend on which option I'm talking about, which one weighs more. I have an overarching concern, or not concern, thing that I'm factoring into my head, is that whatever we develop, whatever we choose, whatever happens, that it is a long-term solution, or the longest-term solution we can come up with. Because I don't think any board members, I don't think any community members, I don't think any administrators, I don't think any teachers, I don't think any parents want to find ourselves sitting here in 3 years or 4 years talking, bringing out the same charts of factors and charts of this and charts of that and making that decision all over again.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Director Baek.
So I have a hard time separating a couple of these. Well, they're all important, but for me, quality of education, which Bruce kind of had in sort of, or Director Potts, excuse me, had is sort of his first one. He described it as impact of curriculum. That would be of primary importance to me. And I really find it hard to separate effect on the community from quality of education, because I feel like in a lot of these schools, part of the quality of the education is based on the fact that the students don't have to go that far to get to the school. Some of these schools are full-service schools at the moment, and being able to go to school in your neighborhood or in your city, if it's a small city, is, I think, kind of part of that. So I have a hard time separating those two, but if I have to, I would put effect on the community second. Of course, I'm concerned about the safety of the students as well, but I would rank for sure the lowest the monetary costs, because I understand we do need to cut money from the budget, but we have to put the students first. And so those two options, 4 and 5, costs of operating and costs of necessary capital improvements, together I would put lower on my scale.
Okay, thank you. Director Mayfield, do you have any thoughts? neighborhood schools. Okay, thank you. Director Baek.
Along those lines, I actually have a question. So as I was doing my research this weekend, I sort of started trying to think of alternatives to avoid closing a school. And so I'm just curious as to when, like, what would be the formal way to introduce if I came up with an idea, or I've heard feedback from the public of things we should look into. How do I bring that up in what forum?
Thank you for the question. As a matter of fact, I'm going to respond a little bit, but Superintendent Tate, would you want to respond directly to Director Beck's question?
Well, I think tonight would be a good time, I mean, as we go through the process, certainly.
So, and there will be plenty of opportunity this evening, whenever you think it's appropriate then, okay? And you won't make it as a motion. This isn't a regular meeting. We won't vote on it, but you could bring up an idea, all right? Director Gosa, do you have any words?
Not right now, I'm just listening.
Not right now, what?
I'm just listening. I couldn't hear anything that Clyde said.
How do we have his phone set up, Harry? Oh, okay. All right. Have you been able to hear most of the rest of it?
Yes, I heard everything but what Director Mayfield said.
Okay, so for all of us that are speaking, try to remember to activate your microphone. What we're asking here for Director Gosa is, do you have a suggestion of your thoughts on the prioritization of the factors that are used to evaluate the closing of a school?
I guess my main concern is direct effect to the classroom and the student. That's the main thing that I look at.
All right, so would that be considered under quality of education, do you think?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and give my thoughts. I too believe that quality of education is the factor that I would be most interested in whatever recommendation is made by the administration. And then I had safety of students and security as the second characteristic I'd look at, and I had the effect on the community as being the third. All others, to me, were just factors that I would have to consider, whether it's miscellaneous or costs or whatever was listed. But those three are the ones that I'm most interested in. Do you have any questions before we move to another area of discussion?
Years of quality of education, safety of students, and
the effect on the community.
thank you.
I do have notes from Director DeSalvo. I've been trying to think about these relative to our discussion. I'm going to read part of her notes right now. I'm not going to read the whole thing because part of it would be more applicable at a different time. First, I would like to thank all of those from the community. These are notes from Director DeSalvo. She wrote them today and left them for me to read if she couldn't participate. So that's what I'm doing here. This is not my comments. First, I would like to thank all of those from the community that came out to the 2 public forums that have been held. Thank you also for the emails and calls. Your comments do matter and will help the board to make these very difficult decisions. Please also know that this is not a done deal, in quotation marks. No final decisions have been made yet. Please review the timeline of this process outlined in Board Policy 501.05. For those that have said that we are only looking at closing a school in our budget reduction plan, I invite you to read the Vision 2020 plan. There are many other cost-saving measures that are occurring. School financing and funding is very complicated. Most in the general public do not understand the laws, nor should they. However, if they chose to research, comments and suggestions are always welcome. I am a parent. I've been through school budget reduction processes many times. I understand the passion and anger when it comes to changes that impact our children, our staff, our communities, and our families. Being in this situation is beyond awful. Having to make decisions that are literally life-changing weighs on me and this board incredibly. There are no good answers yet, but we will continue searching. I've been thinking a lot since the forum last week, and below is something that I would like to have the administration collect data for. That's something that I'll address later when we start giving you information on what we need to make those decisions. And that's mostly what she talks about, which I'll bring up later. One other thing I wanted to make a comment on is that the board has the authority to make the decisions on what's discussed. And so we have the board requests, and if there are things that need to be discussed that haven't been discussed, then those should be brought up by the board, because the board submits those requests. The agenda committee, which is the president, vice president, and superintendent, develop that agenda, but we're only going to have a few more months here. And so if there are issues that need to be discussed that haven't been discussed, I'm urging all board members to bring those issues to the attention of the agenda committee so that it can be discussed, because eventually there will be decisions made, and I think it's September 10th, if I recall, with respect to this particular decision. And so we would need to discuss anything else significantly before that. Director Baek.
A lot of times things come to me as I'm doing research during the week. Is there a way to put in a request, a board request that's not at a meeting?
Right now, I don't know of how to do that. The board requests are intended to be public requests. Now, the chairman of the policy committee might be able to figure a way to make that happen. I'm really serious. It's, you know, the board can make decisions on how it wants to operate. As long as we stay within the law in terms of open meetings laws, and an idea like that, we can at a minimum find out if there's a legal issue with it. If there's not a legal issue with it, maybe we could find a way to put it into our policy seriously, so that it's allowed. And it might, you know, you can't get the second for it, and so there's some little complications, but maybe it could be a like a temporary thing that has to get vetted or approved at a regular meeting, but at least it would get on the docket. Okay? Is that what you were going to talk about earlier? Okay. All right. Sure.
Freedom of Information Act, I assume any public member can ask for information. Is that correct?
The Freedom of Information Act primarily applies to documents that are, I don't know the exact words, but it's public information. Like all these documents here would be documents that people can ask for through the Freedom of Information Act. And then there are some other things that are subject to it, like emails can be subpoenaed and things like that as well. But the general public can ask all the questions that they want, but a question in itself does not connote that the answer is subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
I guess my question, if that's the case, board members cannot ask for information that has been collected, that's basically public information, but they need to get permission to ask for it from the board or go through, I'll say, the proper channels other than just asking for it as any person out there would ask for that information.
I'm not sure where you're going, and if
Well, I'm just trying to distinguish the difference between public information and information that a board member is asking
So,
for.
okay, so board members can ask for virtually anything. It doesn't have to be published information like all of this. A board member could ask for something they've been thinking about, and that's the purpose generally of the board requests, is I want to know this relative to this. And so we have that form, and that allows board members to get reports, to put issues onto an agenda through the agenda committee. But the public, like I say, they can ask anything they want, but if they ask for something that hasn't been developed, for instance, a report on something ridiculous, let's just say how many trees are there owned by the district, okay? That would take a lot of time to figure that out. And it is not the responsibility of the administration or of the board to prepare that kind of information. That is not subject to FOIA.
But documentation that is public information that's not out in left field, they have a right to ask for that information.
That's correct.
And I assume board members as well.
Absolutely.
Whether they go through the proper channels or not. Now, I understand for special projects or things that the district doesn't have, that you have to ask for it through a formal. But ordinary public information, you may not have to do that, or you do have to do that still as a board member.
And I don't want to get too far adrift of what the topic is tonight, because it's on school closing options and Vision 2020. But very simply, board members can go to the board secretary, and they can always ask for information. If it is something that's publicly available, the board secretary will get that for them. And if it's not available, the board secretary will say, we don't have something like that. It's very, very simple.
Okay, because
Okay.
that's what she was asking, I assume.
It
About
had
information in general that she wanted and not go through the proper
but she asked,
for a board meeting in order to get the information.
okay, then I totally misinterpreted. I thought she was asking about preparing a board request. So if I misinterpreted, I apologize for that. Okay, are we good to go on?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, we got through that pretty simply. The next suggested approach here is to take each option one at a time and board members would talk about what information supports the premise that this option should not be the choice. So we aren't looking to prioritize, we're looking to kind of deprioritize, if that makes sense. So we will take each option, and we'll just take them in the order that they're listed. So the statement of options is on page 1 of the document that all of you should have. Is that up here? Okay, thank you. And we'll just take A, and we'll go down through each one. And I'd like board members to talk about why would you not select this option. So option A is implement pre-K or K through 6th grade district-wide. Move 7th and 8th grade students from Williams to Smart, Sudlow, Walcott, and Wood. Adams K-6 students will move to Williams facility. Adams facility will be repurposed or sold. Anybody want to comment on that? Director Baek.
Actually, I have a clarification. So if a question comes up while we're discussing these, we can ask. Like, for example, I wanted some clarification on how shifting to the K-6 elementary model would affect finances if we didn't change attendance centers, and if there's any advantage to what savings do we get from doing that, or does it have to be with closing an attendance center, which applies to the first two options there, I guess.
I think it's appropriate to ask questions at this point. We want it to be a pretty open and somewhat wide-ranging discussion so that board members have as much information as they need to help make these decisions. Superintendent Tate, you want to try that?
So let me be clear, you want to, what if we didn't do anything? Can we just go through a K through 6 system right now? Is that the question?
Yeah, what would be the effect if we didn't close any schools and ignoring all the other things? What is the sort of financial impact of shifting to a K-6 elementary and 7-8 intermediate, if there is one? If there's not one, that's fine
Even if
too.
it'll work. So let me have my experts, Rob and Bill, talk about that.
The staffing ratio for 5th and 6th graders is the same, so I can't imagine there would be much impact in costs. I don't think there would be much savings either in moving them, but no, I don't see an additional cost in doing that.
Did you have more, Director Beck?
Not yet.
All right, thank you. Does anybody want to talk on option A? Because if we don't talk on these, then the administration will do their work without the guidance of our thoughts on this. Director Gosa, do you have anything?
What was that?
Do you have any comments? We're looking at the different options, A, B, C, D, and E, with respect to approaches to closing a school. And what I'm asking for is, do any board members have reasons to not support this particular choice? And we're just going to go through them in order. Do you have anything to comment on with respect to choice A?
I guess myself, I don't support closing a school.
So you're just saying that as a general comment, and
Yes.
that would apply to all 5 options, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to talk about option A? Okay. Oh, Director Hayes.
I have a question, basically, to if you could, anyone, to explain the savings of of 539 students versus 702 students going to a building that can comfortably hold 959 students. That was kind of, it was this 959 here? Let's see, where did I see that? Where did I see that at? 702, 539. I don't see the 959 now.
Williams Intermediate is 959.
Okay, here it is. If the current capacity is 959 from Williams, how would putting those fewer students in there, where would the savings come from? How do you figure that for me?
So that, it's the closing of the Adams building.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our savings. That building would no
Just the
longer be in
building
attendance.
alone.
That building would not be an attendance center. The Adams kids would, if Williams closed, the Adams kids would come across the street and go pre-K through 6 in the Williams building.
But there seems like there would be a lot of vacant seats in there if there's not that many students filling it up.
Yeah, I think there would be additional room there, the amount of preschool we would offer. I mean, I don't know what other options we would do from that.
Okay.
And I think of whatever options we have, there's gonna still be some more seats in all of our schools, but the savings is when you close an attendance center, then you don't need the principals, the secretaries, the custodians, the counselors, that's all consolidated into another school. So when you see the general fund net savings, and it's got the explanation there, that's where you make the savings.
But with those employees, if we're not gonna pink slip anyone, you would still have the same costs for them, wouldn't you?
No, they will, I mean, each year we have principals that move on, so we would have one less principal in the district. Secretaries, they move on. We'd have 2 less office personnel, 3 or 4 less custodians, 1 less nurse. I mean,
So that's basically dependent on retirements.
retirement and people moving on. We always have movement.
Okay. Okay, that's it. That's it.
Okay,
Can I follow up?
sure, Director Beck.
So what if we didn't have that movement then? What if people didn't leave?
Well, we wouldn't, then we'd have to fire people. We've never had that. I mean, that's why I have early retirement, and that's why we have movement every year. I mean, we have been hiring 100 to 150 teachers every year.
Director Potts.
What I see is it's the curriculum impact. It causes the most disruption in terms of students moving, which I referred to earlier. It also caused the need then to develop new curriculum in the 6th grade without knowing what that's going to be, and the weighing of what will 6th graders no longer have access to in the intermediate if they are moved to elementary. There's a number of things that they have access to now in the intermediate schools that may or may not exist for them in the elementaries. Don't know, but that's a question in my head. Also, the other question I had was, you're going to be moving 500 of the Williams students to other schools, so that's could be traumatic, disruptive for them. And then also that's an impact on the schools that they'd be going to. You'd be looking at boundary changes again. And we all know how much we love to work on boundary changes. And the comments I'm making about this option are just as valid for the second option of the Monroe to Smart, okay? What else did I write down? That's pretty much what my concern is, or what would be the thing I would take that off the plate for me. A broader question I had is, in all of the columns, we talked on the bottom about transportation, how much increase, there would be some transportation increases. are those transportation increases already factored into the general fund net savings?
No, those are different. The net savings there are the personnel net savings.
Okay.
So there are some pluses and minuses throughout the model
Okay,
we'd have to
okay.
go through. And if you'd like, we can talk a little bit about what we think the K-6 model would look like. We've done a lot of thought about it, and Rob and Bill have conferred. We don't have all the answers, but we could talk a little bit about what you said, what they will have, and some of the things which will be different. So should we do that?
Well, sorry. Director Mayfield and Director Hayes still had some questions. Why don't we finish up the questions and then we'll go into the explanation. Director Mayfield.
Well, I'm thinking of moving elementary kids into a school that has been built for middle school students, which is a different type of student size-wise and the facilities itself. So is there a cost to doing that? And I'm not talking about the cost for moving across the street, but as far as the cost to the building, what has to be refurbished, changed to make it different and adequate for an elementary student.
Yes, we have under the cost of necessary capital improvements. You know, with the option, we talk about the possibility that about 6.15 million would become available from Adams, and then the renovations at Williams would cost about 3.5 million. So we do take that into consideration. It is under these factors.
Thank you.
Director Hayes.
Even with that, with the renovations that would have to take place prior to the sale of the building, would we be able to do that?
You are talking about Adams?
Yes.
Yeah, so we wouldn't do the renovations if in fact we're going to move. We would just sell as is.
No, I mean for Director Mayfield's question, in the elementary students moving over to a school built for middle schools, even the toilet seats would have to be smaller in some cases. Right. Do we have the funds available to cover that prior to the sale of Adams?
Yes, we do, because we would be using the funds we would have put into Adams. We'll use that to do the reconfiguration of Williams.
Okay. An additional question I had with this, in looking at the retirements, and we're not wanting to pink slip anyone, then at that point, will we offer hiring freeze to not hire additional teachers, or how would we work that? Because as Director Baek stated, in the event that someone did not leave, would we be able to sustain that?
And again, we've never come upon that situation where we haven't had a need for more teachers. And yes, we've from time to time put a hiring freeze on just to make sure that we have a space for everybody that's coming off the line. So we manage that pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this? I mean, we can come back to more, but at this point, Superintendent Tate, if you wanted to explain the how this option would look.
Sure, and we're talking about now either pre-K or K through sixth grade, and that would mean that we'd have sixth grade they remain instead of they go to an intermediate school. So Rob and Bill, talk a little bit about what your thought process is.
In whole, the short answer, which I'm going to give you more than that, would be it would look a lot more like the fifth grade, the sixth grade curriculum. Envisions, am I saying that right? Is currently example of one of the items. But we would stick with that. Whether we would departmentalize at the elementary level would be conversations we would have. But they would still get their PE, they would still get their art, they would get their technology. What's that new? The music. What's the technology integration? I'm trying to think of what that's called. Launch. So there's so you'd have music. We still would have the band, the orchestra, individual lessons. I think one of the things we'd have to work on is what the group music situation would be like, to compare what we currently have. So what is I'm trying to, concert, sixth grade concert, those kind of things. Bringing those kids together, do we bring them to an area, or do we rotate the teachers around to the buildings? So those are just a couple items.
Yeah, we met with curriculum director and her staff and talked a little bit about how would the curriculum actually look different. And the one thing that we did discover was, depending on whether or not we departmentalize at certain grade levels, there would be an increased cost for some curricular materials. If everybody's teaching science, then everybody's going to need science material. However, we're going into a model next year at our elementary schools where one teacher at each grade level is going to be teaching our new science curriculum. So we're already going into a model where the kids are going to rotate with the students at the primary level. So we're anticipating that that's what the sixth grade would look like also.
The other one I was thinking of is sports. We don't have any sports for the sixth grade, so they wouldn't be missing out on those opportunities. It would be, maybe they would take greater advantage of the intramural activities at the elementary gyms because of the gym space. So that may be a positive. I can't say that to effect, but I would think that may be an opportunity for the sixth graders.
Director Potts, you had requested information along those lines before. Is that sufficient to answer your questions? Okay. Do you have any questions regarding what was said?
Right now, sixth graders get science every day in a 45-minute block, and it's a lab experience. They have experiments and they do labs. They have social studies every day in a 45-minute block. They have band and orchestra that meets as a set time period in their day, and it's a large group experience in most of the schools. They get that access, they get that experience. They have PE where they change their clothes. Okay, that's trauma when they start the year. All right. And some of the intermediates, they can be in band and orchestra on an alternating day schedule. Those are the kinds of things that I'm wondering how that's going to fit in to the elementary model, which I'm not familiar with it. I used to say I don't know what's going on across the field, but I don't know that there's a gain for sixth graders. At this point, I don't see that there's a gain for sixth graders in going to the elementary schools. Because if you look at a large group band experience, some of the elementary schools may only have 5 or 6 sixth graders in band. Well, that's a small group. That's not a band. There's just some trade-offs here that I would need more information to flesh out exactly what that day is going to look like for sixth graders.
Comments on that was we know that band is going to be something that would have to be worked out if we get to this point. How do we create that large group experience? You would currently, with the K-5 model, your kids are in reading longer, reading language arts block longer, and we all know that that's a concern in our district. So many of us felt that could be an advantage for students in sixth grade to have a longer block of time for English language arts and writing, which is why we don't have science every day, but we have it basically every other day, opposite social studies. So there would definitely be some trade-offs. There would be some trade-offs. So I think music was one. Math was an extended period too. We go 60 minutes in math, where at the middle school it's 45 minutes. So there would have to be some trade-offs. It would look different.
You okay for now? Okay, Director Baek.
I think you might have answered it. So currently what we're doing at the elementary, if I understand it correctly, is sort of block type of scheduling where they spend a fair amount of time on each subject, more or less. But they still have their specials. They go to PE and music on alternating days. And I know in the past, some elementary schools at the 4th and 5th grade level have traveled. So, but they stopped doing that when we went to this modified block schedule. Would it be possible to, I mean,
Yeah,
how would that work?
there are some elementary schools that departmentalized in the 4th and 5th grade. They've gone away from that primarily. There a couple of places where it's still in existence, I believe. I wouldn't say it's completely out of the works. However, next year we're putting a new launch curriculum, a new science curriculum in place. And that's what I was referring to, where the plan with the principals were that a teacher at each grade level would become the launch expert, if you will, the science teacher. One would teach social studies and one would do writing, and they would rotate every 3 days. So that'll be a new thing next year. Currently, we rotate at the elementary in almost every building, in a 3-section building for sure, music, art, PE, every 3rd day. So one day you go to music, next day you go to art, the next day you go to PE, then you go to music, then you go to art, then you go to PE. So that's the rotation part.
So wouldn't that then be less contact time in science and social studies?
It actually turns out to be more contact time in terms of minutes, just less frequently. I mean, it's on a 3-day rotation. Currently, they're doing a semester of science and then a semester of, or quarters of science and a quarter of social studies.
So they would have it all year then?
Have it all year.
Okay, which pedagogically it makes more sense
Yeah,
anyway.
we felt that way too.
Okay.
Is there any additional discussion on option A? Okay, why don't we move on to option B? So option B is to convert all elementary schools to a pre-K or K through 6th grade. All current intermediate schools will become 7th and 8th grade. Monroe School will be vacated and the current SMART building will contain grades preschool through 6th grade. 7th and 8th grade students will attend Williams, Sudlow, and Walcott. Monroe School building will be repurposed or sold. Any comments, thoughts? Director Hayes.
With Monroe, it was not as much of an issue for me for the simple fact that they're moving to a different building literally within the same block. However, for the kindergarten or for the 1st graders, that may be a bit of a traumatic move for me, but my main concern is with the 7th and 8th graders at SMART. With SMART and the successful programs that they have, will those programs be transferred and implemented at Williams, Sudlow, or Walcott? Would they be able to still have the same status that they have now?
You know,
And programs that are working, like the school within the school.
the school within a school could be relocated. Comes out of their allowable growth budget. It could go, so it's not a general budget savings right now. So that could follow students. We would have to determine what junior high they would go to, whether it be Williams or whether it be SMART, depending on which of the first 2 options. Sudlow already has that. And then the other one is the AVID program. We currently have AVID at SMART and at Sudlow. So again, it's grant funded. So whether that would follow to Williams or a different building could.
Because I guess my concern is some of the programs that are helping some of those students, I wouldn't want those students moved and the program dissolved and then they need that additional assistance that they're no longer getting. Another question or a concern that I have here with this particular one is we just changed the bell time to cut the bus costs. Now we would require additional bus costs to get them to, hypothetically, as far as Walcott. And that's almost like contradictory.
I believe that the bus cost is, we would be busing them to one school already, and so if the bus would run to a different intermediate school. I'll use Jackson, for example. I believe many of the Jackson students are bused to SMART or bused to Williams, and so if they decided the Jackson students were going to go to Walcott, the busing cost exists there.
No, but I'm referring to the students from from Smart to Walcott.
Yeah, that's what I'm, the Jackson, but there's Jackson students who go to
Oh,
Smart.
okay.
Well, yeah, so
Okay.
I'm referring to them.
Okay.
So I think students, Hayes students, I don't know if many of the Hayes students are bused too, so there'd be some additional cost there for them to attend. I think they would be attending Williams in the feeder. I'd have to look at the feeder.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I didn't think there would be much of a cost on the paper that was there. Mr. Maloney, yeah. And it may be because the buses are not full, and so they're gonna be traveling by and still able to pick up additional kids. I really can't speak to the busing. I just know that it wasn't a factor that came up as a major impact to the budget.
So any other discussion? Director Baek.
A couple of things. So this is the one that I was kind of mulling over, but I guess it could work for the first option as well. I know we have K-8 at Walcott, and I was looking at the numbers, and if we have to renovate the Smart building to accommodate elementary students anyway, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be feasible to essentially, rather than adding, preschool classrooms, adding middle school classrooms so that we could have sort of a combined K-8 building, which would alleviate the need for any students to be bused further than they already are. The way I figured it out, there'd still be about 100 students that wouldn't fit in that building if we sort of did minimal addition, just a few middle school classrooms that would still need to be sent to other intermediate schools. But I think I was trying to think out of the box of ways to disturb the least number of students and keep that community, because the fact that the two buildings are right next to each other, I think, is a real asset. And again, this may work equally well. It might be equally crazy for Williams and Adams since they're right next to each other. So that was sort of one of the proposals I came up with as I was doing my research this weekend. And I wrote some things down, which I'll share with you guys by email. And a lot of the reason I came up with that is that I have concerns with the effects on the community. I've been listening to a lot of the parents, and I realize particularly in those two neighborhoods, the schools are really a vital part of actually in any neighborhood, but we've heard a lot from those parents or from and teachers about how important those schools are. Those aren't the parents that come to these meetings, so we have to rely on the teachers and other people to tell us, and the paras to tell us what's going on. But those are the families that need the most support and would be the most disrupted by moving to a new place. Let's see, what else was I going to say about that?
Can I
Yeah,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question on that one? So you're asking, Monroe is approximately 400 students right now. So if we continued Monroe basically as a K-8 building, that would be roughly 700 students in that Smart building. That'd put them, and so, but that wouldn't bring any other students. It wouldn't bring any Hayes. It wouldn't bring any Jefferson. It wouldn't be any Wilson or
Why
Jackson
not?
students. Because you would already be at 700 students
Oh,
just by doing just the Monroe students, K through 8.
I was suggesting if we're going to renovate it anyway, to add a couple of middle school classrooms to accommodate some of those other students, right?
Which building? Renovate which building?
If we're going to renovate Smart to accommodate Monroe students anyway.
Yeah, but I don't think that would increase capacity.
No, I'm saying it would be easier to, if we're going to renovate it anyway, because it's already not at capacity. Right now we have, Smart, you have listed as 809 students. And if you took the current enrollment of both Monroe and Smart, it's 988 students. So that's 179 students more than would fit in that building if you just combined them just out of the box. If you added a couple of classrooms at the middle school level, you're going to increase capacity by another 50 to 75 if you add 2 to 3 classrooms, right? They're about 25 students per class.
Yeah, you'd have to add, we'd have to 8, yeah, but we'd probably have to add eight classrooms.
8 classrooms?
for 175 students. 7, maybe you could maybe get by with 7, but
Okay,
I'd say 8 additional rooms.
okay.
and-
But I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of ways that we can use the renovation costs, not general fund money, to make changes with the least amount of disruption. And since those schools are already essentially next to each other, we wouldn't change traffic, we wouldn't change busing, we wouldn't change, who's going there. We'd have to put money into the building, but we've already got money slated to do that. And
Mhm.
it
Yeah,
could potentially be an advantage. And depending on how much space we added to that smart building, we'd still be able to sell the Monroe building or and have it repurposed for a community center or whatever we wanted to do with it. And, yes, there's a chance that we might have to redistrict the intermediate schools. So some of those students that would now go to SMART might go to Sudlow or Williams because there's room. But it would still disrupt and move fewer students than we're talking about right now.
The last part, my
Okay.
math mind is there when you're saying
Okay.
redistrict and some of the other students, some other
Mhm.
middle schools, makes it more of a possibility.
And I think given the fact that we have to do pretty extensive renovations to that SMART building. If I'm reading this document correctly, it's already $6 million, I think. Is that what it says?
Well, Monroe was, I think, more expensive than Smart.
Right, for the new entrance,
$6 million of the smart renovation was for a new secure entrance.
part of the 6 million, yeah, was for a new secure entrance. But I guess we all know that if you're doing building projects, it's easier and cheaper to add to a building project that's already going to happen rather than create a second.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why that conversation came up originally about Monroe, was because I think on their long-range plan, they have a multi-purpose and preschool wanting to be added at millions of dollars. The facility behind them, Smart, could be renovated and you wouldn't have to build a multi-purpose room, for example. So we were thinking the same way, only it was just moving the elementary in there. I hear you say K-8 in that building and add an addition to that building. So put 4 new classrooms, leave Monroe Elementary sit empty, or sell it, and make it a K-8 building is what you're proposing. I hear you.
We'd have to recalculate the personnel cost because in that size of a building, it's not just a matter of the same amount we have now, so we'd have to see what it would take to run a building that size and then what the savings might be.
Like I said, it's what I came up with this weekend, trying to think of the ways to disrupt the least number of students and also accomplish what we're trying to accomplish and hopefully not close the school. So I will send you guys this as well, just so you have what I wrote down on paper. Ignoring that and just going back to the option as written, I guess the advantage of this option over the first one is that it looks like you guys have judged that there's more interest in the Monroe building than there would be in the Adams building?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay.
Not at all. I mean, again, some people may have come up and talk about Monroe, but
Okay.
that should not be in your calculation right now, and we usually don't do that as part of, we think they're both valuable and there could be something in both neighborhoods, but no, that's not part of what I'd consider.
Okay, good. And I guess I would say if we, given that there are some positive things happening at SMART and at Monroe, some good programs that, as Director Hayes said, I don't think any of us want to see those go away because they're actually working. I guess I would want to make sure that we don't eliminate any of those programs.
So I just want to clarify, Director Baek, what I heard, because I think you've said quite a few things, but they're towards the end, the last few minutes. I think what you said is that with some of the modifications that you offered, that you're leaning toward repurposing or selling Monroe is a viable option, or not even though you don't want to close a school, it's not one that you that you would just disagree with. Is that kind of right?
Yes, if I had to just given these options, I would not cross it off the list.
That's
But I-
sufficient.
I would rather do something else.
Well, I understand that. I understand that. It's just, right now, we're trying to figure out what we want to do. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other discussion on this option? Director Gosa, do you have anything? Okay, I'll take it as a no. Director Mayfield, looked like you were getting ready to say
Yes.
something.
Well, I haven't thought all the way through what Director Baek has talked about as far as using SMART as a K through 8. But what is of interest to me is that what we have in the past done is closed a lot of schools that not only affect a neighborhood, but it's actually shifting the population of the city. One of the things that is so important is that people have an opportunity to go to neighborhood schools. But as in the past, we've closed a lot of those schools in certain neighborhoods. I see closing SMART or Monroe is creating a desert-like environment when it comes to education. If you look and see what schools that we've closed up to now, what it does is it makes people move to where there are schools that are open. I mean, everybody wants to be in a neighborhood school. And so closing those schools down there definitely makes a difference in the neighborhoods down the road. The other school that, and I always remind people of this, that we've talked about keeping our high schools, or at this time 4. Actually, we were talking 3 at the time. But if you throw Mid-City in there, you're talking 4 high schools. And we're talking about keeping them all open. But if we close the schools that is basically the attendance center for those students to go from, whether it's elementary and junior high or middle school, to our high schools, then we're virtually prematurely closing or changing our high schools for down the road because the students will not be there. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind when we're talking about closing any of these schools, that it may not change it tomorrow, but down the road it's going to change it if we don't have students that are close to those schools. I cannot imagine, regardless of which high school you're talking, if there are no students around that high school, that school will stay open in the next 10 to 20 years. So I think that's something to keep in mind as we're talking about closing schools. What effect is it going to have on those high schools? So I would love to see somehow that we could keep, if that works, what Director Baek is talking about. It does not close a school, at least it doesn't displace the students. It keeps them in the neighborhood. But my concern is not just today. My concern is 10 years or 20 years from now, if we continue what we've done in the past, and that is we've closing schools in certain areas. And to me, those are the folks that need the education the most, and we make it more difficult for them when they have to take buses or they don't have the transportation to go out to the other schools. So I just wanted to give you my feelings on that.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? I do have a comment from Director DeSalvo on this. She says, as far as the school closing proposals at this time, I'm leaning toward one elementary closing. I am not in favor of option A or option B. Okay. Director Potts.
I like Director Beck's suggestion here. I think that that sounds really workable. I think it in some respects it gets us off the hook, you know, and I think in other respects it satisfies some of the needs that we've heard from people in the community about not wanting their school closed. When I talked earlier about long-term solution, I'm wondering if maybe we shouldn't look at not only the K-8 model at Smart, but also at Williams, and do them both, and then maybe we'll not have to put everybody through this again in 10 or 20 years, because Clyde will still be here on the board.
At least my spirit will be.
Well, something will,
about
yes. That would be, you know, I would seriously think we could look at that. Might have to do some elementary boundary changes to shift some Adams kids to maybe some other schools, or some Williams kids or Smart kids around, so that you don't overfill those two buildings. But it would, I would think it has the potential for being a longer-term solution than closing Washington, or closing Buchanan, or closing down the entire city of Buffalo.
All right, thank you for those comments. Superintendent Tate.
I must caution everybody before we run out and say this is a solution. We have to do the numbers. This whole point was to save money, and the way you do it is through personnel. And again, by that combination, I'm not seeing a lot of numbers, because the more people you need, and the more nurses you need, the more room you use, and the more custodians you need, the more people to help with discipline. So let me do that and get back to you.
And certainly, Dr. Tate, I mean, we're just giving you input at this point, and we know you're going to have to do a lot of number crunching on whatever we do. So, Director Beck.
Do I need to make an official board request for that?
For what?
Okay.
For what? Oh, okay. All right. Is there anything else on this option B? Okay, we'll move on to option C. This is close Buffalo Elementary School and move students to Jackson, Bluegrass, and Hayes. The Buffalo School building will be repurposed or sold. Is there any discussion? Director Hayes.
And going with the model previously discussed, I'm doing the numbers here on the Walcott schools. If Walcott Intermediate and elementary could be combined with the information on Buffalo, basically a few things that I in favor of is the STEM program, the cost to move it being the new school. Even though it's half full, it has a lot of programs in there, and I guess I'm trying to figure out, of the numbers here, how that school was added to the list versus, say, as an example, Walcott Elementary, which only has 192 students.
Well, Walcott Elementary is at Walcott with the K through 8, so we never thought about taking just the elementary students away and leaving the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. It is a K through 8. And again, we don't look at the programs in schools because they can be moved. Every school will tell you we have the best students, the best teachers. They ought to. And we don't consider that either. What we consider is the facility itself, number of students in there, and what schools will fit into which schools. So that's why, again, when you ask me to look at the schools in the western part of the district, Buffalo will fit and to the other schools.
So Walcott is already K through 8?
Yes.
That's just one school, this is just a breakdown of the numbers?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Anybody else? Director Baek.
After sort of looking into the details a little bit more, which this whole process is for, I do have concerns about the STEAM lab. I know other schools make field trips there, and it's a big asset, and it would not be a simple task to relocate. And the fact that that building is a new building that we're not slated to really put much money into over the next 10 years, I'm leaning away from that option pretty strongly.
Anybody else? Director Potts.
Seems to be some of the travel times for kids going to the other buildings, if we close it, is going to be pretty long. And one of the things I object to it is this: you're closing a school it's the only school in the entire city, the entire town. It's not like in Davenport, we have a number of elementary schools, so I just don't think it's viable to do that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Director Gosa, do you have anything to say?
No, I don't.
Okay. Director Mayfield, you got anything?
Yep.
Okay. I'll say that for a number of reasons, and we've had so many great advocates from so many schools and communities. And when the mayor from Buffalo talked about the significance of the school to the whole community, I was thinking about a video, and I've mentioned the video before. We have a copy. What's it called? Yeah, that doesn't. Yeah, I thought it was a real simple title. That doesn't sound quite right, but anyway. Okay. Anyway, the point of that is that video talks about small communities, rural communities in Iowa. And I think it talks about some of the statistical stuff where Iowa used to have over 2,000 school districts, and now we're down to 330 or whatever the number is. We've had a lot of consolidation over the years, and it has been particularly tough, I think, on rural Iowa, rural communities. This particular one, and I can't remember, it's been 3 years since I watched the video, but talked about a couple of these schools, and one of them, the community just kept losing enrollment, and so they were consolidating, and you consolidate your kids out of your community to another community. And there's one that I'm particularly engaged with, and it's a district that's been reorganized at least 2 different times. It's consolidated. There are 3 different districts that have been consolidated into one. That district has approximately 353 square miles, and our district has about 109 square miles. The really tough part of that was that the building, and we can all see it when we go into these smaller communities, the school is almost always the biggest building in the town or the city. And these communities count on that for so many different activities. It might be, of course, the school, they may have other activities going on. But the tough thing is in some of these schools that close, the school districts haven't planned, they haven't put aside the money to take care of the school when they abandon it. And then it becomes a safety hazard. It goes into disrepair. it falls in on itself. It's just a crying shame, I would say. For me, it's a little bit passionate, and it might be because I viewed the video. I've listened to a lot of people. I value the significance that's been put on the school by not only the mayor but by other people. And I believe that the school is very, very important to that community and to the city of Buffalo. And for that primary reason, along with several others, I would be opposed, generally speaking, to that particular option. Is there any other discussion? Director Mayfield, anything?
No.
Okay. All right, if there's no additional discussion, we'll move on to the next option. Option D is close Washington Elementary School and move students to McKinley, Garfield, and Madison. The Washington School building will be repurposed or sold. Any discussion? Director Hayes.
Due to the fact that there's Washington is a title school, I'm opposed to selling it, but of all the schools listed here, I feel if it did come to that this one would probably be one that would be sold quicker and not turn into a situation like Lincoln where we're sitting on it for years with the revitalization and the hospital expanding. I do feel that, it wouldn't be long that it would be on the market, that they would purchase that land right away. But again, with it being a title school, I have a tough time displacing those students to go to other schools, in particular those walkers that, they could go. McKinley is pretty close, but no, I just have a tough time with that. But the only positive is the quick sale.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Director Gosa, do you have any comments on this? I'll take that as a no. Director Baek.
I have similar concerns to Director Hayes. Shifting, taking a school that's a Title I school and having to shift all of that funding around, and those are the students who need the least amount of disruption, typically. And then also, I know that's a very active part of the city, and it's an area that the city has been working with businesses and other community partners to revitalize and build up. And so that's what when I first started asking questions about where new houses going in and things like that. That's the type of thing that I'd like to avoid, is closing a school in a neighborhood that's being rebuilt or thriving, because then you can't attract families to that neighborhood. So I'm leaning away from this one.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All right, well, we're moving right along. We'll move on to the last option then.
I do have something to say about that.
Okay, Director Mayfield.
I am opposed, as I always say, to closing schools. The only positive thing I can see about the location of where Worthing is, that there are at least 3 elementary schools within 2 to 3 miles of it. I don't see that as reason for closing school, because I think it has a special population that it's serving there. But at the same time, I realize that it's not like those kids would have to be bused all the way across Kimberly as closing some of our other schools would. So it's something to think about.
Thank you. If there's nothing else now, we'll move on to option E. Option E is to close Buchanan Elementary School and move students to Truman, Fillmore, and Harrison. The Buchanan School building will be repurposed or sold. Are there any comments? Director Hayes.
This pretty much is like Washington, with it being in a, literally, within blocks of a housing, low-income housing project. Those students, I feel, being out of that neighborhood, because when you think about it, those impoverished students, some of them have probably not done much on this side of Kimberly Road, and to be taken that far away from their school, I think that would be pretty traumatic for them.
Is there any other discussion? Director Potts.
The item I had on there was that it's a boundary bumper, because then the Truman kids are gonna have to be taken out of Truman and sent someplace, so there'd be room for the Buchanan kids to come to Truman. And that doesn't eliminate it off my list, but it's just a concern that I would have.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on this option? Director Baek.
I'll echo what Director Hayes and what Director Potts said, is it's going to cause a shift in a lot of other boundaries. And I'm concerned about the travel times for students who, again, this is another Title I school, which would cause changes in that funding as well. The students who need the least amount of disruption would be getting the most disruption. And so I'm leaning away from this one as well.
Thank you. Anything else? Director Mayfield, do you have anything on this one?
Well, it just takes me back to some of the proposals that we've had before. Maybe they didn't come official, but it really does affect where students are sent to. I know at one time there was a proposal on the table that we have special ed students or some other students, shift them to other schools outside the city. And I thought the problem would have been that we're putting kids in elements that they're not used to. And that in itself creates issues. So I'm glad to hear that we're considering that when you close a school, where you send that kid to does make a difference.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Director Gosa, do you have anything?
No.
Okay, thank you. I think we're done with this part. In a minute, I'm going to open it up to some other discussion that there are some other comments, suggestions that board members want to make. But before I get there, Superintendent Tate, have you gotten enough information or guidance from the board to help you in your thinking about these options?
I have notes. I mean, I listen carefully, so we just need to talk a lot more. So, yes, it's very clear. Thank you very much. I like this approach, and I'll keep listening.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. And I wanted to thank the board for being prepared to answer the questions in this manner. Hopefully, it will help the administration. I want to open it up to any other issues with respect to our topic here. The subject is school closing options / Vision 2020. I have some notes from Director DeSalvo and Director Baek. Is this appropriate time for you to make your comments, or was it with respect to SMART and, okay, you're good. And that made sense to the administration as a suggestion for something that we might do. And then Director Potts shortly thereafter offered a similar approach using Williams and Adams, which might be combined with this, and we know that there's more work that needs to be done on all of that. Is there any other discussion on these issues? Closing the schools, Vision 2020, Director Baek.
I had emailed Mr. Scott earlier today, but I didn't get to it until late. So I'm going to ask you now, and you'll get the question again in your email. Dr. Tate had brought up the switching from block scheduling to traditional scheduling as a potential money-saving matter, and I did contact our Davenport Education Association rep, Toby Payon, and sort of asked what the likelihood and to explain a few little details. So I was just curious if if that was actually a money-saving matter, if it's something that could be renegotiated before the contract came up, if it has to be negotiated when the contract comes up, and those types of things. You don't have to answer that right now, but I figured this is a good time to ask.
Yeah, I can answer it because I've been conferring with our lawyer to see what we can do since Chapter 20 has changed. And we have a contract with the DEA through June 30th of 2020. And until that time, we can't unilaterally make any movement. We tried a few years ago to do that, and they reminded us of an ancient arbitration, which is still valid. I think it went back to the 80s. At that time, I had a couple lawyers look at it, and they did indicate it still stands, and we cannot change their work conditions without paying them more. At the time, we had some discussions with the DEA, and it didn't go that direction. So until June 30th, 2020, when then we will work from a pamphlet, a book for a personnel handbook, we will have to live with what we are. They were the only ones that could change that.
Thank
The
you.
savings, by the way, is about a net of $1.3 million.
Okay, so this would be something that we could bring up in 2020 when those negotiations are going forward. Okay, and I'm just wondering because I understand the teachers. I don't want to, make them do more for less or anything like that. But given the options of closing a school versus, adjusting your schedule, sometimes adjusting the schedule may come out on top when it didn't before. So anyway, just wanted to know about it. Thank you.
And just a little bit further, the teachers are one issue, but the other is that when we talked about this, it didn't go over very well. I mean, 95% of the people who came to meetings did not want to change from the block to traditional. Now, again, at meetings, people who like the way things are, want to change, stay home. But it was not very popular at the time.
Any other comments? Director Gosa, it sounds like we're getting close to wrapping up. Do you have any comments in general or things that you... Well, I'm going to ask here in a minute about additional information that we need. But do you have any comments about the options of closing schools or other option or other issues regarding Vision 2020?
No, I do not.
All right, thank you. I'll try and read Julie's comments then. Director Mayfield, did you have anything?
Closing comments.
We're getting
No, I
okay.
didn't
So
do
we're
that.
I'm gonna have an opportunity for closing comments in just a minute.
Go
This
wait,
is
so-
okay. So I'm going to try to just read the sections that she wrote that I didn't read earlier. So she did talk about, she invites everybody to, and this was a letter, I think primarily to the community, but she talks to the board and to the administration also. I invite you to read the Vision 2020 plan. There are many other cost-saving measures that are occurring. And if the board can think of other ways to save over $1 million, then we can avoid closing a school. Believe me, this board is trying to find other ways. I have been thinking a lot since the forum last week, and below is something that I would like to have the administration collect data for. Dr. Tate has always said no pink slips. He has been adamant about protecting his staff. I hope they realize how lucky they are for what he has fought for all of them. It has been made loud and clear from the many teachers that have shared their opinions with us that they do not want to close a school. Many have shared the wonderful things that occur in their schools that they are very proud of and should be. After looking at some very rough numbers, I would like to see data and savings if the district considered laying off staff. This would mean at all levels and positions. This must include administration. My very rough calculations were that if we reduced 32.5 FTEs with an average salary of $40,000, we would be at the 1.3 million number. This does not include loadings, for instance, costs that are not salary paid to every staff member, i.e. health insurance, etc. If implemented, this would be a sustainable savings. However, this is also a very difficult option to consider. I hate the thought of anyone losing their job and losing very good people. We must consider all possible savings, and unfortunately, I think we need to research this. I'm asking that the administration gather this data. And then she says that parents and teachers voiced concerns about boundaries. This is a big undertaking, but perhaps should be considered at some point. I am just not sure when that should be. I am concerned to learn that families live just blocks from a school, but the boundaries have them at a different school. I will continue to look at any and all ideas, data, numbers, etc., to help me make informed decisions. We will do all that we can to minimize negative impacts to our families and communities. Community input does matter. Thank you, Julie DeSalvo. So I just wanted to, she had specified some things in there, that some additional information and an additional idea. And she wanted to get that out at this meeting.
So I don't know what it means to gather this data. Are you suggesting I bring to you names of people who will be released? I mean, because that's what's
No,
next.
no.
What do I do?
No, let me talk with Julie. She's on vacation this week, and perhaps next week we could get a little bit more information on that, what that means, okay? So with that, I just want to make sure that the board has an opportunity to express if there are other data that we need. Is there something we need with respect to this? The administration has tried to give us not only options, but some of the reasoning for some of this, and the board is having this opportunity to share where they're going to go. But I would say if there's more information that the board needs, we can always send that to the superintendent. If you have things that you'd like to talk about now, if there are closing comments, this would be the right time. And then I suspect that we'll wrap up this meeting. Director Baek.
I just have one other question. I know I've gotten a couple of emails about reducing the number of principals at particular locations and things like that as a money-saving venture, or associate principals, I guess, or having one principal over multiple buildings. And I was just wondering if that was something that could be looked into, or if it was even feasible. I have no idea.
So we've reduced 2.5 associate principals this year. I have looked into combining principals, and this is just not the time to do that. It's too important to student achievement. It's too important to discipline. We have given that consideration, but again, 2.5 associates in 1 year is pretty big.
Director Hayes.
I don't have any requests, but I do want to thank you for the information that did come out, and this information was 20-plus pages, was really helpful in me making some decisions with what I had. So thank you for that.
Director Potts.
I just wanted to reiterate that we need to look at the long-term solution. And if that requires doing two things, doing two schools, then the Smart and the Williams option, I think we look at that. I think I'd rather think big, do big. I got an email from somebody that says, "Time rip the Band-Aid off." Just so that we're not in this position again, that we're not putting our students through this again, that we're not putting our administrative team through this again, that we're not putting our parents through this again, because people adjust to change. Nobody likes change, but we adjust to change. And if I had an example, would be bell schedules. All the email, nobody wanted these bell schedules to change. Nobody wanted to change from what it was. But when we were talking about changing the bell schedule 6 years ago, nobody wanted to go to the bell schedule that nobody wanted to change this year. Because we adjust. We get used to it. We make our changes in our lives. We make our changes in our schedules. And I just think and this K-8 possibility alleviates my concerns about the sixth grade curriculum and the give or take if they have to go to the elementary school. So as I say, I'm interested in what is the long-term solution that's the least disruptive, but in the long run puts us on a path to financial stability, so that we don't have to look at paring back, cutting. Because all we've done since in the last 10 years we've cut up to 10 million already in the last few years, 20 million in the next couple of years. We've got to get to the point where we don't have to do that anymore. Settle our financial issues, and then start let's attack the enrollment problem. Because we know all of those people that came to our forum, they told us they didn't want their school closed because it's a good school. Good things happen there. So we need to make sure all of our public relations, all of the things, whenever we speak, whenever we talk to people, it's how good our schools are. How good our schools are. How good our schools are. And I firmly believe that. 6 of my children went through our schools. They're all paying taxes.
Thank you. Director Baek.
I just wanted to say in closing, I know this is painful for everybody. None of us wants to be here, but I appreciate the administration for listening to us and listening to the community, and I appreciate the work that the board is putting into this, and I also appreciate the community sending us their messages and giving us feedback. We're never going to make everybody happy. We're going to do the best we can, and I hope that we do come up with a long-term solution so that we're not in this position again. And I also hope that the legislature changes so that we can get a little bit more money and we see on a bigger scale people prioritizing education again. I think that's one of our big problems.
Thank you. Director Gosa, you got anything?
No, I just look forward to seeing what Director DeSalvo comes up with, what she's wanting for information next week.
Okay. Director Mayfield.
Yes. I'm sort of like Director Potts, looking down the road. I've been around for a while. The problem that we're having is not something that happened in the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. You might even say 20 years, because I was here when we had 18,000 students. And in the last 10 to 15 years, we've declined to where we're at now. The question is why? There's some things that are beyond our circumstances that we can do nothing about. People aren't having as many kids. But we know that there are some things that we can do something about. We are always hearing about we are the district of distinction. Well, we need to be the district that stands out for the positive reasons. And we have many of those good reasons there. But for whatever reason, we are not attracting, we're losing students. And I don't care what we do, how many buildings we close, until we are able to attract, to figure out why we are losing so many students. And there are some reasons why, but when are we going to stop it? When are we going to become so good at what we do? And I'm talking about serving students from the top to the bottom adequately to where everybody wants to be a part of the Davenport school system. And that is when the erosion is going to stop. But prior to that, we're going to keep struggling. And I hope that there's something that we can do to make that change come about. I know that we all want change. We all have tried in our certain ways of bringing about that change, but we're not there yet. Because when we get there, we'll stop losing students and we'll stop closing. So regardless of us not wanting to close buildings, I don't see it stopping until we make the real profound changes within the district where everybody is happy, everybody's getting what they want, that everybody is being served in the way that they think they should be. I know the effort is there, the want is there, but until we're able to make that a reality, we're going to keep losing students. So I'm glad that we're doing something about stopping the bleeding for the moment, but it's only momentarily if we're not doing something to get those students back, to bring people into the community. So thanks for the efforts that you're putting forward. I think we're all trying to do that, but we haven't got there yet. That's why we're still losing students and we're closing schools. So.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Mr. President,
Superintendent Tate.
I meant to slip this in before you started your final comments, so let's go back to, is there anything else we can do? So we have increased class size in intermediate and high schools the last couple of years. This next year, we'll be adding 2 students in K1 and grades 2-3. If in school year 1920 you want to add 2 students to every classroom of the entire district, you would save 25 teachers or $1.4 million. I've never brought this up because this is not something that keeps the impact away from the classrooms. For example, what you would have is a K1 of 24 students per classroom, 2-3 of 26 students per classroom, 4-5 of 28 students per classroom. Intermediate would be 28 and high school would be 30. So that's not something I would recommend to superintendent, but I just want, when people ask, are there other things, I need to at least tell you, yes, there's ways to save money if you would accept that. $1.4 million, 25 teachers.
Was there anything else? Are there any other comments by other members of the panel there? Okay, I've just got a few words then. So we are all in this together, and Director Mayfield was talking about that, and it is the administration and the all of the district and the board and the community members, all of you out there, no matter what school you go to, what part of the community, all of this is important. And it really is important for all of you. I appreciate all of you that are here, that you're here. Some of you have been to the forum. Some of you have spoken at our open forum opportunities, which occur at every regular meeting. And every regular meeting, you have that opportunity to come and tell us what is important to you. The emails are important, and we get updated on those, and there are ideas included in some of those emails, but all of your input is really, really important. I just wanted to emphasize that to all of you again. But take advantage of our other opportunities for expressing your perspectives, whether it's at our regular meeting, and whether we have one more forum that is scheduled for September 10th, I think.
No, 5th.
5th. I apologize.
I think
September
it's the
5th. I wanted to mention also that the board has a lot of activity during the next month or so, and it may not seem like we should right in the middle of summer, but there's a lot going on. And I do want the board in particular to note, and we will be trying to send out additional information, but we have a special meeting on September 28th. And I believe the time is 5 to 7.
5 to 7.
If I recall that correctly. And that is to be a joint meeting between the board and the city, the aldermen. So I'd appreciate if any of
Say
the...
September?
What's that?
Did you say September?
If I did, I apologize. It's going to be
Okay.
June. June. I tell you, I'm goofed up. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, I'm at June 28th from 5 to 7, and the meeting is going to be in this room, I believe. But we'll send out more information. I just wanted everybody to be aware of it. With that, I don't think I have any more comments. Are you raising your hand, Claudia? Oh. I thought you were, as you were going like this. So, okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.